Hi, friends. I hope everyone's doing well. If you read my August 4th community post, you know that I took last week off from YouTube to work on some old items on my to-do list. One of those items was recreating some monoprinted papers. I filmed that art session to share the process, which is this video. I have other more detailed monoprinting tutorial videos that I'll link in the description area. This video is not as structured as a tutorial. I'll show how I recreated these scraps into prints and created some ghost prints as well. So let's get started. This teal paper is the first one I'm going to recreate. I believe I use a cotton swab to make the marks on the original print. Then I'll make this paper, which looks like a ghost print of the green paper. I brought out this teal green paint because I thought it was the same color used for the original paper. As you will see, it was not. The original color leans more towards blue than green, and that's okay. Some of the new monoprinted papers will be inspired by the scraps, but not exact duplicates. I'm using a cotton swab as a writing tool. I'm using a semic writing for this pattern. If you haven't heard of this type of writing, it's a series of marks like cursive writing, but it's illegible. It's a great way to express yourself in a private way. I think this print turned out well. There's enough paint on the paper and on the gel plate for the ghost print. Next up, I'm using yellow oxide paint to pull the ghost print. It's best to use a small amount of paint when pulling a ghost print, which I admit I occasionally apply too much paint. This is why I'm placing small amount of paints around the gel plate. Also, I want to make sure there's enough paint so I can evenly distribute it around the plate. I want to mention that the first layer of paint on the gel plate should be on the drier side to get a good ghost print. If the paint isn't on the drier side, it may smear when you apply the next color paint on top of it. I've done that and gotten an expressive looking print. Those prints can be beautiful as well, but if you want a sharper print, make sure the first layer is on the drier side. I like the way this ghost print turned out. I like the unevenness of the teal green paint layer. There's still paint on the gel plate, so I wanted to see if I could get another ghost print. I used the yellow oxide again. I like this one as well. The teal green marks have a good texture. Also, I like the variation of values in the yellow oxide. These are the next two papers I'm recreating. I'm going to start by creating the green paper, but only using green paint. There are some brown paint spots, but I'm omitting that color. Then I'll create the mauve green paper from the leftover paint on the gel plate. I don't remember how I made the original marks, so I brought out this comb that has thin and closely set teeth. The marks are very close together, so either it was made by this comb or maybe a paintbrush. I decided to go with the comb. Since I don't remember what paint color I used, I brought out this dark green. As soon as I started making marks with the comb, I knew I didn't use it for the original paper. These lines are uniform and too close together. I decided not to be too concerned about replicating the marks, so this paper was inspired by the original, not a duplicate. I'm happy with the print because it's one I haven't made before. It has a nice delicate pattern. For the ghost print, I brought out this light lavender color. Again, I wasn't sure what color I used for the original. When pulling a ghost print, I found that you can get a good print with a small amount of leftover paint on the gel plate. You'll see in a minute that the ghost print is successful. I like this print as well. I wanted to try another series of similar color prints, but using a fork instead of a comb. I like the look of patterns created by a fork. This is a good clean print. This ghost print turned out as well. There was enough paint left on the gel plate, so I decided to pull one more print. I like the worn looking texture from the second ghost print. The pattern of this next scrap is hard to see. There's a faint impression of small bubble wrap. I'm using yellow oxide for the first layer, which is the bubble wrap impression. I like to gently press the bubble wrap into the gel plate so there's enough pattern transfer. If the pressure is too heavy, the bubble wrap will smear the paint since the gel plate is slick, so the pattern won't be as clean looking. I missed the opportunity to use bubble wrap to print on a blank piece of paper. You can get a good print using this method. I'll use it later in the video. You probably noticed the paper off to the right side. I'm using a large pad of paper to wipe off the paint on the brayer. I've used these waste paper in my art practice as collage papers and painted substrates. I have a video using these papers as substrates that I'll link in the description area. I think this print is a duplicate of the original. It looks good. There was a generous amount of paint left on the plate, so I'm pulling two more prints, one using yellow oxide and the other one using off-white paint. My hands were getting tired, so I brought out a Baron to use. This is one of the best art-related purchases I've made. It really saves your hands and wrists if you're printing a lot of papers at one time. The next set of papers are this orange and white and this orange and yellow. Similar pattern that I used previously. There are certain patterns that I like to use in my art practice. I just changed the color combinations. The orange and white is the first paper to be monoprinted. I'm using the plastic fork again to make this pattern. The orange and yellow paper is the ghost print. I like the papers made with this pattern and color combination, so I'm making another set. The pattern will be different though. It'll be like the pattern of the green and mauve papers. There's enough paint left on the gel plate, so I brought out off-white paint to see if I could get one more print. This ghost print turned out well. It's good to have some light value monoprinted papers in your stash. I don't have enough black and white papers in my stash, so I decided to recreate these two monoprinted papers. The circle pattern was made using a cardboard roll. When I create patterns with circles, I like to have an uneven space pattern. I think it's more interesting looking than a uniform pattern. The next set is these pink papers that were made with small bubble wrap. The paper on the left will be created on the gel plate. The one on the right will be created by pressing the painted bubble wrap on top of a blank piece of paper. I wasn't sure of the exact pink paint I used, so I brought out this medium pink paint first. It's a bottle that I should have returned because the consistency is too thin. It may have been an error in manufacturing. It was hard to spread on the gel plate because of the thin consistency, so I added some of this lighter pink to thicken it. It did lighten the color, but I'm okay with that. Both prints turned out nicely. This pink plaid is the next one to recreate. I started by mixing these pink paints together on the gel plate to get a good mid-tone value pink. This first pull will be a somewhat solid ground color that will be used as a base for the plaid pattern that will be printed on top of it. Since I'm using these prints as collage papers, I cut off the unpainted sections before putting it in my stash. When I need to line up paper on the gel plate, I trim off at least 2 of the unpainted areas. Leaving 1 or 2 unpainted areas attached helps to pull up the paper from the gel plate. There are guides you can buy if you'd rather not cut any section of the papers, but for my purposes, I'd rather just cut off a section or 2. I use this altered gift card to create the uneven plaid pattern. If you haven't watched any of my other videos before, I like uneven patterns. I think it's more interesting and easier to create than evenly spaced pattern like a plaid. You can see how I lined up the 2 cut sections of the paper to match the gel plate. There was a small amount of paint on the gel plate, so I brought out light pink to see if I can pull another print. I applied too much paint, so I used the brayer to remove some of it. The ghost print had a faint pattern, but it's usable. I brought out some off-white paint again to see if I can get one more print. Even if it produced a light pattern, I could still use it since I don't have a lot of light value papers in my stash. I'm happy with the way this ghost print turned out. Great texture. I'm recreating another pink paper. I like the look of light green circles on pink. I brought out this other pink and green scrap as inspiration because I wanted to try a mid-tone green version as well as this light green version. First, I'm creating the lighter green and pink paper. The circles are created again using a cardboard roll. This first layer is being created so there'll be green circles remaining on the gel plate. The white and green light paper created from this first layer is another light paper that will be useful in my art practice. This print didn't turn out as well as I had hoped. It's still usable. I think what happened was the light green paint was too thin, so there wasn't enough left on the plate to pull another print. Next up, I'm trying the darker green to see if I get better results. You can see after this pull, there's enough green paint still in the gel plate. There's still enough paint on the gel plate, so I brought out off-white paint again and pulled 2 more prints. I don't know if you noticed that the gel plate would move a lot when I pulled up the paper. At this point, I decided to try placing it on plexiglass to see if it would keep it in place. On to another color. I need another red pattern paper in my stash. I like the pattern created by using large bubble wrap. Again, I'll use the painted bubble wrap to create a print on blank paper as well. Both prints turned out successfully. I love the tone and tone look of this burgundy paper. I thought I knew how I originally created it. It seemed simple. I created the first layer by covering the whole gel plate with burgundy paint, then used a plastic fork to create the wavy pattern. I pulled the print, then added more burgundy paint for the final print. This first one turned out nice. It's a good print for my stash. There looked like enough paint remaining on the gel plate for the final print. It's an okay print, but it doesn't have a strong definition between the wavy pattern and the ground color. Maybe the first layer of paint wasn't dry enough on the gel plate, and/or I didn't put enough paint for the second layer, not sure. I was curious to see if I could get a good print using off-white paint. You can see some of the pattern, but it's mostly a light textural print, which is good as well. Next up is this green and yellow print. I like how the edge on the left side is uneven. I believe I used twine to create the line work, but I didn't have any on hand during this printing session. As you will see, I improvised and achieved a look very close to the original. I cut two sides of this first print because I need to line it up with the second layer of paint. I'm trying to mimic the original by not spreading the green paint evenly on the gel plate. First, I used a cotton swab to create some of the line work. It gave an uneven look like the original. Then I used the end of a comb to create the thinner line work. The original print has thick and thin uneven lines. I'm happy with the way this print turned out. It's almost an exact duplicate of the original print. There was enough paint still on the gel plate, so I created a ghost print. Another circle pattern, but in green. I decided it wasn't necessary to print on a book page as I did with this original. As you will see, I had a hard time matching the green color. After I applied the emerald green color on the gel plate, I knew it was too light, so I brought out this darker green to mix with it, hoping it would match the original. The circle pattern is slightly different than the others. The circles overlap each other for a denser look. I want to point out the texture of this paint isn't as smooth as using matte acrylic paint. It gives a different look to the print. It's neither good nor bad, just different. It'll be obvious once I pull the print. I decided to try another print, but just using the darker green matte acrylic paint. I wanted to see if I could get the color closer to the original print and to have a smoother paint finish. This print is darker than the original, but I like the smoother look of the paint finish. There was enough paint left on the gel plate for a ghost print, so I brought out yellow oxide to pull a different colorway. This is a simple textural print that was made by using a big, thick paintbrush. I like having simple as well as complex pattern prints to use in my art practice. I lightly drag the brush along the surface to create uneven horizontal lines. This print is pretty close to the original, but it's slightly darker. The next set of prints will be blue. I try to group by color when monoprinting, but it doesn't always turn out that way. I'll be recreating this textural print. It was created by crumbling plastic wrap. It's a simple, straightforward method that achieves interesting pattern prints. More times than not, I try to get a ghost print if there's even a small amount of paint left on the gel plate. This is a great way to create light value prints. I like to make sure I have papers in all three values in my stash. This is a good light value textural print. This is another print that was easy for me to recreate. I started by printing a solid ground of this light yellow paint, then creating the plaid pattern using dark blue and an altered gift card. This print is a good match to the original. Again, there was enough paint left on the gel plate for a ghost print. This time I brought out medium blue paint color. Along with having all three values represented, I like to have monochromatic prints in my stash as well. I like having different styles of plaid patterns in my stash. It's one of my go-to patterns. I'll be recreating this plaid pattern using a plastic fork. This is the darkest blue paint I have, but it's also thinner than matte acrylics because it's a fluid acrylic. I don't use it much, but I thought it'd be a close match to the original print color. I don't recall what paint I used for the original, so this is a guess on my part. I like the result of this first print, but I wanted to try another one to see if I can get a darker blue. My application was different this time. I used a bit more paint and lightly spread it around the gel plate. Neither print is an exact match, but this last print is darker than the previous one. I decided to create another monochromatic ghost print using the paint that was left on the gel plate. I'm continuing to make more blue color prints. I kept out the dark blue fluid acrylic paint and brought out again large bubble wrap. I like this technique because you can produce two prints at once. The negative and positive prints turned out successfully, and there was enough paint left on the gel plate for one more print, another monochromatic blue print. Another color that is needed in my stash is brown. I'm recreating this brown plaid that is like the ones I made earlier in this video using an altered gift card. This time I'm only using one layer of brown paint to create this plaid print. A bit lighter than the original, but still a good brown print. There was a small amount of brown paint left on the gel plate, so I pulled one more print using this yellow oxide paint. The next series of prints will have a similar pattern to this scrap. I'll be using the other end of a plastic fork to create the swirl pattern. I'll add music during the next sections while I create the similar pattern prints and come back when I start creating a different pattern. We're in the home stretch of this monoprinting session. Next up, I'll be creating black and white prints with two different patterns. First up is this diagonal pattern made with a plastic fork. The next two prints will have this wavy line pattern created with a plastic fork. First in black paint, then I'll create a ghost print using white paint. These are all the monoprinted papers that were created. This monoprinting session took a little over 2 hours in real time and produced 63 prints. I encourage you to try monoprinting if you haven't. You can create a large amount of prints in a short amount of time. I find it to be extremely fun and relaxing art process. I'll link the monoprinting tutorial videos as well as the waste paper video in the description area. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Take care.